1, 2, 3, 4. If you can do all your stuff, what can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
Welcome to It Chooses You, where we delve into what brings us joy and what that says about us. So I woke up this morning and I have to give you...
Let's say good morning first.
Hey, I'm sorry. Good morning. Well, this is going to be my good morning. My good morning has content. Okay, it's not just phatic, right? My good morning is I woke up and checked our stats because I'm obsessive like that now. And we had more downloads yesterday than we have had in a single day. Ever.
Nice.
It's only 12.
Wonderful.
It's only 12, but it's awesome. And it's a big spike from our average of 2 or 3.
Welcome the 12 of you, even though I know this isn't the episode you downloaded.
Hello.
We'd like to officially welcome all 12 of our listeners.
Yay. It's a little party and you have a front row seat. Also, right. We now have at least 3 people who've downloaded an episode from Germany and 1 from Austria.
Wonderful.
Which is new.
You know, we're kind of a big deal in Germany, everybody. This is a little known fact about us.
We also have 1 from Iceland, 1 from the Netherlands, 1 from Mexico, you know.
That's so fucking
others.
Cool.
But isn't that nice?
We're people of the world.
Huh? I mean, to be an American who's popular in the world, you probably just have to be able to say, yeah, America's pretty fucked up, huh? And I think most people will respond to that.
That's right.
You know, we're simple species. We see something fucked up, somebody says it's fucked up, we like them. It's great.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's half of life, is just finding the people who see the fucked up nature of the world in the way that you do.
Uh-huh. That's right. Yeah. We call those friends. That's what we call those.
Yeah. There's friendship of utility, there's friendship of the good, and there's friendship of the fucked up.
What were you quoting? Friendship of utility and friendship of the good. That sounds like a philosopher.
That's Aristotle.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, that's Aristotle.
Yeah. Kicking the Aristotle in right off the bat, man.
That's right, man. Nowhere to go but down from here.
I know, right? So, everybody, prepare to be disappointed. Just a little, though. What have you been doing this morning?
Well, I've been playing some video games and reading some news.
Yes.
So it's been a good Sunday morning. We're recording a little later than usual, so I feel like I've had such a leisurely morning. I woke up very early this morning. So
Yeah, I am.
As happens.
As you just woke up when you have lots of time, when you have fun ahead of you instead of not fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I want to maximize the fun part. I should get up at 4 this morning. I said the reason I requested we record a little later is because, as we have discussed briefly, I had to get a job, which is like a normal thing that people have to do. But my job is quite physical. And so I came home from work at a little after 10 last night, and I was tie-tie.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to have to sleep in. My poor old body. Not old. I'm 44.
Well, I'm glad that you felt comfortable asking for that. That's good.
Yeah. I was like, please, I need to sleep. What were you going to say? See, mine wasn't that interesting. Yours is only going to be
No, I want to see if anyone else feels this way. I don't know if I was discussing this with you or with my loved ones here at home, but I live with 2 people that like to sleep way more than I do. Now, I love sleep and I sleep well. I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. But I don't want to lay in bed for hours in the morning, kind of waking up and going back to sleep, because I always feel like I'm going to miss out on something. Like since I was a kid, I wake up sort of excited about what's going on. So
it's delightful. It's one of the things I love the most about you.
They were sort of laughing at me about that. And I was like, but something might happen. What if I miss out?
I believe that's how animals and children respond. So I think, like, if we have to choose a way to wake up, it's probably a good one.
Yeah. What's going to happen today? Now, occasionally I wake up with anxiety. So that does happen as well. I should be completely transparent about that.
Oh, sure. And when I had a job I hated, I woke up every morning like, I have to do this again today. Oh my, how am I going to do this all day again today? So, context matters. Yeah. Well, right. So, job, School.
Mhm.
I have 4
Mhm.
weeks left in this semester. So the specter of finals is there. And because this job sort of wanted to, like, so they wanted to, like, get me started as soon as possible. And so I basically applied for a part-time seasonal position, and I'm working
Mhm.
full-time now,
Right.
in addition to being in school full-time.
Because the holidays.
Because the holidays, right. And what a very nice segue. We are talking about one of those holidays today on the podcast.
That's right. So this episode will be released the day before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And we are recording the Sunday before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And I would really like to call this episode, if you're not opposed, Teresa and Claire Ruin Thanksgiving.
I'm in favor of that. Yeah. I was
Okay.
thinking something much more po-faced, like rethinking Thanksgiving or something, but yours, as
Right.
always, is better.
And, you all can probably look forward to an episode called Claire and Teresa Ruin Christmas.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. I'm so looking forward to that. Oh, that's going to be great. Thank you. I can't wait to ruin Christmas for everyone. But today, not Christmas. And today, actually, we're not ruining Thanksgiving for everyone, right? We're only going to ruin it for white people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we had a discussion a few days ago about how we would be remiss not to discuss the holiday of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Everything it represents, everything it should represent, and what it certainly does not represent.
Yes.
Which is this mythological idea of the Pilgrims and Native Americans having this wonderful meal, bringing everyone together, and it has been celebrated annually since. And nothing is wrong here. These are not the droids you're looking for. Eat your turkey and shut the fuck up.
That's right. I mean, there's a reason it's turkey, right? Tryptophan puts you to sleep. There's something deeply symbolic about that. Yeah, so as we were talking about it, we sort of decided to each take an aspect so that perhaps we could have a more coherent discussion for you guys. What? And I was not assigned, but I am more interested in historical because boy, do I like to wax rhapsodic about the past. And you had asked for sort of more contemporary or where we can, do you want to talk about how you considered your part of it?
Sure. Yeah, I had wanted to take, I took food as the access point. And what it ended up being was a little bit more a look at what's going on now in Native American communities. And there's actually some big stuff up right now. So there's some really relevant, cool stuff. It's less about food than I had intended, but there's some cool stuff happening now, potentially cool stuff happening now, potentially shitty stuff happening earlier this year. And we're going to get into that a little bit.
Cool. So I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So, I'm going to list my sources off the top, and then I'm also going to remind of those sources as we go, because it is very much a patchwork of things. So my resources are, of course, Wikipedia. Thank you for everyone who edits that situation. A blog called Unsettling America, which is totally excellent and has a huge number of very wonderful articles by a bunch of different people. I really recommend that one. An article written by Ashley Nicole McCrae that's published on Counterpunch, History.com, an op-ed in the LA Times by Tommy Orange, Sarah Vowell's book, The Wordy Shipmates.
Love Sarah Vowell.
She's so great. Barb Munson from the Oneida Nation, the Indigenous Solidarity Network, and Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who wrote The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States.
Great.
Okay.
And can I just say something about the spirit in which we're undertaking this? We thought a lot about this year, and, everyone keeps saying the circumstances this year are unprecedented, and that tends to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't like to be uncomfortable, but when it happens against my own will, I like to ride that wave of discomfort into growth.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of taking that spirit of like, nothing's normal. A lot of people aren't meeting with their families. Like, let's ride that. Let's ride that discomfort and try to fucking better ourselves, right?
Yeah. Well, and, as we have said before, I think, when there's a moment where everything falls apart and you have chaos introduced into the system, there's an opportunity to reorganize the pieces as they come back together. And so what better opportunity we have this year than to reorganize in a slightly more equitable way for the people of the world.
Excellent.
And the people of this country. Okay. So Edith Wharton says there are two ways of spreading light, to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it. And I'm choosing as much as possible to be the mirror today. And relying on voices that are not mine and don't come from my location because they do know better. So I'm recording right now in what's called Boulder County, Colorado, which is the occupied homeland of the Hinoe people, the Nusiu, and the Tzitzitlas. Those are the Arapaho, the Ute, and the Cheyenne. And on this land, we can't talk about Thanksgiving without talking about the Sand Creek Massacre, which happened on November 29th, 1864, and I'll do that in a bit. But as Claire mentioned at the top, the American myth of Thanksgiving really centers around the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. And so we say Pilgrims, but they're Puritans. And they're Puritans because they were basically religious revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the government of England and came here when it was clear that they weren't going to be unable to do that. Well, like, if we can't do that, if we can't change this country, then we'll just go to a new place, right? Mm-hmm. And the key thing about the Puritans, I think you have to understand to grok any of this, is that they believed that every single thing that happened to them was God's will. Every single thing. So I think as humans, we can probably pretty easily understand that if we say everything that happens is God's will, usually we mean it's God's will if things turn out okay for me. Right. And if things don't turn out okay for me, well, then man has interfered in God's will. I think that's a pretty easy stretch, right, for humans to make.
Or the devil.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Well, and that's actually more accurate. And you would. So Claire has a religious upbringing of some kind. I do not. And so I always defer to you. If you want to replace man with the devil, I trust you.
They're quite often the same.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a different episode. If something you did caused harm to someone else but benefited you, that's the manifestation of God's will, right? Mm-hmm. And the end of that thought experiment is that if you can get away with it, you were somehow supposed to get away with it. And on that basis is built a huge amount of suffering. Okay? So, and now I quote Stephen Fry. Religion. Shit it. Okay. So, in roughly October 1621, there was a feast where about 90 colonizers and 53 indigenous people sat down together and ate and hung out for 3 days. That happened. Okay. More importantly, and I think a better indicator of the arc of this story, however, is that on May 26th, 1637, so that's 16 years later, 2 hours before dawn, Puritans and a few Native American allies marched on the Pequot village at Mystic, Connecticut, what's now Mystic, Connecticut, and they slaughtered all but a handful of the inhabitants of that village. They burned the village, and they burned the women and children alive in the longhouse where they were hiding. They killed somewhere between 400 to 700 people.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. On June 5th, so 10 days later, Captain Mason from the Plymouth colony attacked another Pequot village, this one near present-day Stonington, Connecticut, and again, the indigenous inhabitants were massacred. And of course, I mean, there's a supreme technological advantage here.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then on July 28th, a third attack and massacre occurred near present-day Fairfield, and the Pequot War, quote war, came to an end. So that's just over 2 months, and an entire tribe was wiped out. Okay? So that's the definition of genocide. Most of the surviving Pequot were sold into slavery, but a handful did escape to join other southern New England tribes.
And just to reiterate, these are our pilgrims.
Yeah, that's right. These are our people.
These are the people we're having kids draw and dress up as, and I dressed up as a pilgrim when I was a kid.
Uh-huh. And so that description is almost verbatim from that bastion of social justice, history.com. Like,
right.
You know, they open their description of this by saying that the Pequot were, quote, warlike. Okay. So leaving aside their, lack of attention to their language or deliberate, reinscribing of certain fake facts, right? I don't want to say fake news, but like
those liberal cucks over at history.com.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. But like calling them more like, so the Great Migration, which is when all of these people left England, essentially, a very turbulent time in England, and everyone's like, we got to get out, right? About 80,000 people left England, and they went to like one of 4 places, and about 20,000 people ended up here, okay? So the same people...
Oh, sorry, when you say here?
Here, I mean Turtle Island, what is now the United States of America.
Okay,
yeah.
Great.
I should say what is now known as the United States of America. That's more accurate. Okay, so as I was reading that, I was like, okay, so it's clear, like, the same people who are most upset by the idea that we white people should acknowledge our complicity in genocide and all the things we've gotten from it, right, are the same people who would completely understand the Pequot resisting Pilgrim occupation, right, if the Pequot were white. Because the Pequot were essentially embodying modern stand-your-ground laws. Get away. Like, no, right? So I find that deeply ironic. And so when we say genocide, this is kind of what we're talking about. Today in the United States, there are 500 federally recognized indigenous nations comprising nearly 3 million people. They are descendants of the 15 million native people who once inhabited this land. So yes, it's not an exaggeration to say genocide, and it seems so silly to have to keep arguing this point, but here we are. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, of the Pequot Massacre in Massachusetts, Governor Bradford of the Plymouth colony said this, and this is from an article by Ashley Nicole McCrae in Counterpunch. Governor Bradford said, "Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others run through with rapiers, so that they were quickly dispatched and very few escaped. It was conceived they thus destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see, them thus frying in the fire. Horrible was the stink and scent thereof, but the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them."
So let's unpack that for a second. Yeah. First of all, I love, and by love I mean don't love, how, you know, it seemed like it was a hard thing for him to witness, and I'm, you know.
Oh gosh.
You know, gosh, like lamenting your own sorrow and horror at seeing what you have created.
Right. Gosh, those people I burned alive sure smelled bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then to attribute it to God's will, as you mentioned earlier, is just disgusting to me. It's disgusting.
Yep. So really, and very explicitly from there, what they're thankful for is their ability to bring about genocide. Now, thankfulness itself, I think, is a positive life orientation. And the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, they do an address of Thanksgiving before any important meeting. They greet the day with it. It's a part of native cultures of this land. But embracing gratitude without acknowledging the historical realities that exist here, and also without working to remedy the foundational injustices of this country, is completely hollow and self-serving, in my opinion. Okay.
So I just want to say something here, which is that, you know, I've thought a lot about what acknowledging this means and what does it mean for the holiday. And I am all about a holiday that involves sharing a meal, preparing and sharing a meal with your loved ones, and embracing gratitude. I don't have any problem with those essentials of the holiday. My problem is with this history that we're glossing over. So I've just thought a lot about, I'm trying to separate the threads in my mind a bit. I'm in that process. Mm-hmm. So you all are going to witness that process.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I want to say that Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who wrote the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, she says, when Abraham Lincoln first proclaimed a national day of Thanksgiving, to be celebrated on the last Thursday in November, there was no mention of pilgrims and native people or food or pumpkins or anything like that. It was simply a day for families to be together, mourn their dead, and be grateful for the living. And I think, she says, that that's an appropriate holiday, that that's how people should enjoy it. But they should take Native Americans and Puritans out of the picture for it to be a legitimate holiday of feast and sharing with family and friends.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
So do you have a sense of when the Pilgrims and Native Americans enjoying a meal got inserted into the meaning of this holiday?
Yeah, it seems like that didn't happen until the late 1880s, 1890s, which is sort of like the final Western expansion. Like that becomes the myth at the point at which we are systematically erasing tribes from the Western United States and fighting those fights. Yeah, it seems like that's coincident. Yeah. Okay.
There's a pattern here, folks.
Oh yeah. Ashley Nicole Murray, in that article on it's called Decolonizing the History of Thanksgiving on Counterpunch. She says that the occupiers celebrated the genocide of the Pequot and thanked God for the victory, right? And immediately after, they started working diligently to whitewash the history. The name of the tribe was erased from the map. The Pequot River became the Thames, and the geographic space the Pequot inhabited became known as New London, as if they never existed. Yeah, so whitewashing and erasure. That's what we're dealing with here, right? Now, she goes on to say that we must thoughtfully and intentionally intervene here, because while Thanksgiving may seem like calling it Thanksgiving or celebrating it without thought, it might not be consequential to everybody, but the historical context that gave rise to these terms and celebrations contribute to real-life consequences that still impact Native peoples today, right? So it's not like it happened ago and is no longer relevant. It's happening now, right? 3 million current tribal members in the United States who have to deal with Native American mascots and unknown, like ignorant celebrations of Thanksgiving, etc. Okay, so I'm going to do a little sidebar here on this woman. So Ashley Nicole McCrae, she may be my new hero. She's amazing. She's much younger than us. Sorry, I won't say your age. She's much younger than me. She, I think, is still enrolled doing a PhD in the University of Oklahoma. And she spoke to the Democratic National Convention Youth Council in 2020. So she's an activist and she's around. She actually ran for Oklahoma Corporation Commissioner in 2016. And let me see if I can really quickly. Yeah, so she says, my priorities as a commissioner, this is from her Introduce the Candidates website, right? Mm-hmm. My priorities as a commissioner are to prevent and abate pollution caused by industry, to protect Oklahoman drinking water, reduce man-made earthquakes, revisit the issue of interstate dumping of fracked wastewater, and to better foster accountability, communication, and transparency of this committee.
Wow.
Currently, unless Oklahomans are scouring legal notices across the state, the OCC, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, administratively approves incoming projects, which puts the onus of responsibility on consumers to protect their environment, communities, and property values, when instead it should be the responsibility of the corporations that seek to profit. We are not disposable people, and this is not disposable land. Yeah, I love her. Okay, so that's the genocide of the Pequot. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz gave an interview for Democracy Now! At some point. Sorry, I don't have the date. It's probably been 5 years ago. She said that George Washington then, 100 and math, 50 years later, 100 and math years later, George Washington headed the Virginia militia for the very purpose of killing Native people on the periphery of the colony. That's his gig. That's how he was a military commander here. And then she said, as I quoted earlier, the original Thanksgiving that was decreed by Abraham Lincoln in 1863 had nothing to do with Native American and Pilgrim relations at all. And she suggested, if we want to actually be thankful, there's a way to be thankful without introducing that very toxic myth, right? Okay. I found this article written, or an op-ed by Tommy Orange. It was published in the LA Times in 2017, November 23rd. He's an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. So that's the Tzitzits and the Hinoehi of Oklahoma. That's how he's credited in this op-ed, right? So remember at the beginning, I said, I'm currently occupying the homeland of those people. Right. Why are they now the tribes of Oklahoma? Okay, right. So we'll get to that in a second. He teaches in the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and his novel There was published in 2018. He says, we don't have to buy turkey. We don't have to buy into any of it. Sure, it's tradition. So is the Confederate flag. There was one meal in 1621. In 1622, the Indian Wars began, and Native people were systematically erased through genocidal policy. The Indian Wars didn't end until 1924. He says, celebrate the holiday or don't. Believe in American mercy or don't. But look where this tradition has gotten us so far. Look where we are now. He says, at Sand Creek, Colonel John Chivington said, "Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians, and I believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians." He and his men killed more than 200 elders, women, and children in a single day, and he was never held accountable for his actions. So that was the Sand Creek Massacre, and now we have to talk about that. Sand Creek was a massacre of Tzitzita's and Nonowehi people by the U.S. Army that occurred on November 29th, 1864. A 675-man force of the 3rd Colorado Cavalry under the command of U.S. Volunteers Colonel John Chivington attacked and destroyed a village of Cheyenne and Arapaho people in southeastern Colorado, killing and mutilating an estimated 70 to 500 Native Americans, about 2/3 of whom were women and children. That's a very broad range. 70 to 500 is very broad. It's because it became a scandal because it was a massacre. And so people who were eyewitnesses gave different body counts, essentially. The soldiers said one thing, the people who'd survived said another. And so we have this range. And so the specifics of how many people were killed and mutilated is up for debate. But it's not up for debate that it occurred and that there was absolutely no way that these people deserved the massacre under no circumstances or could have retaliated. Okay?
Right.
So by the terms of the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie, between the United States and 7 Indian nations of the era, including the Cheyenne and Arapaho, the United States recognized that the Cheyenne and Arapaho held a vast territory encompassing the lands between the North Platte River and the Arkansas River, and eastward from the Rocky Mountains to western Kansas. This area included present-day southeastern Wyoming, northwestern Nebraska, most of eastern Colorado, and the westernmost portions of Kansas. Enough land for them to continue living their life the way they had, right? Mm-hmm. But then gold was discovered in the Rocky Mountains. Mm-hmm. So like we white people do, we, quote, renegotiated the treaty under military watch. And on February 18th, 1861, 6 chiefs of the Southern Cheyenne and 4 of the Arapaho signed the Treaty of Fort Wise, in which they ceded most of the lands designated to them by the Fort Laramie Treaty. The second reserve was only about 1/13 the size of the space promised in the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. Okay, so 10 years later, I'm sorry, we actually need most of this land. Sorry, our bad. We need to renegotiate. You can have this little piece, right? And they're pushed further and further east, where my understanding is the hunting is sort of less and less plentiful, and they have such a small area to do it in. Okay, so the new treaty had been signed without approval of the Council of 44, which is the tribal leadership of the Cheyenne and these groups. So the warriors of various tribes disavowed it and started attacking settlement camps. But again, let's be very clear. They were fighting for land that enabled the survival of themselves in their person and also of their culture. And they were technologically completely outmatched. We call them the Indian Wars, but mostly the battles were massacres. Okay?
And I just want to point out here that it is a culture who is fundamentally disconnected from and raping of nature that would not understand that you cannot substitute first of all, a fraction of a piece of land or one piece of land for another.
Yeah.
Where their cultures were adapted to those pieces of land, their knowledge, their history, their belief systems, their entire beings were one with the land.
Yeah, deep interconnection. Yeah, deep interconnection.
And so not only is it not right to take someone's land, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of connection to nature to think you can just substitute that out for something else.
Yeah, and I imagine an argument where well, you have enough land to farm, just start farming. Right? As though that's an option. It would be the same as, I'm trying to think of a corollary, same thing as saying to Christians, well, you're not allowed to be Christian anymore. Just worship this other thing instead. Right? Can you imagine the outcry?
Yeah. Just pretend it's Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not to say that indigenous tribes worship the land. That's not what I'm saying. Right. But, there's a parallel there for sure. So Black Kettle, who was the leading chief of around 163, mostly Southern Cheyenne, led his band of people, joined by some Arapahoes under Chief Niwot, who is from here exactly, where I am, to Fort Lyon, which is east of what is now Pueblo. And he did this in compliance with provisions of the peace parley held in Denver in September of 1864. So after they reduced the amount of land these people had to live on, the warriors of the tribes just started attacking settlements, like I said. And so there was like, we're going to try and negotiate peace, but you need to stop attacking us, etc. And so finally a group said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll go to this place, right? So shortly after they had arrived to Fort Lyon, they were asked to relocate to the Big Sandy Creek, which is about 40 miles northwest of there. They flew the U.S. flag, and they flew a white flag underneath it to signal that they were not there as a war camp. They were there peacefully. So meanwhile, Colonel Shivington and 425 men of the 3rd Colorado Cavalry rode to Fort Lyon and arrived on November 28, 1864. Once at the fort, he took command of 250 men of the 1st Colorado Cavalry and set out for Black Kettle's encampment. The following morning, Shivington gave the order to attack. Now, 2 officers, Captain Silas Sewell and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, refused to obey and told their men to hold fire. But everybody else started attacking with guns and artillery. Okay. So this is from congressional testimony after the massacre. John Smith, a white man, civilian, who was near there and went after, right, saw this and reported to Congress that, quote, I saw the bodies of those lying there cut all to pieces, worse mutilated than any I ever saw before. The woman cut all to pieces with knives, scalped, their brains knocked out. Children 2 or 3 months old, all ages lying there, from sucking infants up to warriors. By whom were they mutilated? By United States troops. And even Kit Carson, the prototypical white male frontiersman, right, who in his time had like a really devastating and profound impact on westward expansion, he said to Colonel James Rustling of the Sand Creek Massacre, he said, just to think of that dog Shivington and his dirty hounds up there at Sand Creek. His men shot down squaws and blew the brains out of little innocent children. You call such soldiers Christians, do you? And Indians savages. What do you suppose our Heavenly Father, who made both them and us, thinks of these things? I'll tell you what, I don't like a hostile redskin any more than you do. And when they are hostile, I've fought 'em as hard as any man. But I never yet drew a bead on a squaw or a papoose, and I despise the man who would. So, like, even Kit Carson, who's not into social justice, he's a colonizer and has all of those attitudes, when he says that shit's fucked up, like, there you go. That's the authority. That shit's fucked up. Okay. So, in testimony before a congressional committee investigating the massacre, Shivington claimed that as many as 500 to 600 Indian warriors were killed. But historian Alan Brinkley writes that, having looked at all the accounts, it was about 133 Native Americans total, 105 of whom were women and children. So, several investigations were conducted, 2 by the military and 1 by the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War. And the panel from the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War declared, as to Colonel Shivington, your committee can hardly find fitting terms to describe his conduct. Wearing the uniform of the United States, which should be the emblem of justice and humanity, holding the important position of commander of a military district and therefore having the honor of the government to that extent in his keeping, he deliberately planned and executed a foul and dastardly massacre, which would have disgraced the veriest savage among those who were the victims of his cruelty. Having full knowledge of their friendly character, having himself been instrumental to some extent in placing them in their position of fancied security, he took advantage of their inapprehension and defenseless condition to gratify the worst passions that ever cursed the heart of man. So, like, when the Committee on the Conduct of War starts waxing poetic about how horribly you've behaved and the evil that you have perpetrated, like, I mean, this just gives you a sense of how, even at the time, this was viewed with disgust. And it's not necessarily that exceptional, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I just want to acknowledge that, we don't consider this a comprehensive history of the atrocities committed against the native sovereign nations in this country.
That's right. This is for me anyway, just my way of trying to engage with this time of year in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So this is nice. I'll read this too. So this, good writing anyway, not nice. Joint Committee on the Conduct of War concludes, your committee are of the opinion that for the purpose of vindicating the cause of justice and upholding the honor of the nation, prompt and energetic measures should at once be taken to remove from office those who have thus disgraced the government by whom they are employed, and to punish as their crimes deserve those who have been guilty of these brutal and cowardly acts. Mm. However, none of the people responsible for that massacre ever received any punishment.
That's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, so outrage, right? After the actual details of the massacre became widely known, the United States federal government sent a Blue Ribbon Commission whose members were respected by the Indians, and the Treaty of Little Arkansas was signed in 1865, so a year later. It promised the Indians free access to the lands south of the Arkansas River, excluded them from the Arkansas River north to the Platte River, and promised land and cash reparations to the surviving descendants of Sand Creek victims. However, the treaty was abrogated by Washington less than 2 years later, all major provisions ignored, and instead the Medicine Lodge Treaty reduced the reservation lands again by 90%, located it in a much less desirable site in Oklahoma, and later government actions further reduced the size of the reservation. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there are parallels here, right? Something horrifying happens, and even people who are of a particular bent recognize it as horrible. Mm-hmm. And then just a few years later, we just, let's just forget about it. We really need this land for other things now. You gotta go. And then it goes away again. So this like outrage and forgetting that white people really like to do, like we need to work on changing this pattern.
We have to reckon with this as white people.
Yeah.
We really do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who wrote Indigenous Peoples' History of the U.S., concludes her interview on NPR by saying that Americanism is white supremacy. There's almost no way to reconcile it. It simply has to be deconstructed and faced up to, and otherwise there'll be no social change that's meaningful for anyone. And the amazing blog Unsettling America, Decolonization in Theory and Practice says, as with any work in which we are acting in solidarity against oppression, we recognize that we do this work not for Indigenous peoples, but in partnership. We act out of mutual interest, recognizing that we are all facing the crisis of climate catastrophe and environmental destruction. It is Indigenous peoples who are fighting back most intensely and defending their lands. Supporting Indigenous protection of lands and waters ensures they will be protected for future generations. Mm-hmm. And Maya Angelou says, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Mm-hmm. And so I want to conclude my part of this by saying we need to be more courageous. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to look at this, but we have to do it. We need to be more courageous. It is time to be the person Mr. Rogers knows you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I did a lot of research on ways to celebrate the holiday that is perhaps a bit more thoughtful. Mm. And I listened to Indigenous voices to gain that information. Mm-hmm. And the first step everybody said is to acknowledge this history.
Yeah.
So here we are sitting here talking about these difficult things. My sources for my piece of this, there's a post on Civil Eats. There's an article by Alexandra Talty, Talty. There's a piece by Sean Sherman, Sherman, on Time magazine. And there's a piece in the New York Times by Coral Davenport. One thing I discovered that I did not know is that November is actually Native American Heritage Month. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really appropriate for us to be discussing this now. So the tribe that shared that meal with the Puritans is the Mashpee Wampanoag. Mm-hmm. And in March of this year, the Department of the Interior, under the Trump administration, issued an order to federally deestablish their reservation.
Yep.
So the idea is they would technically be able to hold on to their land, but they'd have to pay this huge sum of back taxes.
Yeah. Sorry, I just have to say, like,
did you get into this too?
I read about it and decided it was too late for me to be involved. I thought you'd probably get it. when I read that, I was like, that's a perfect encapsulation of this neo-fascist whatever the hell. Like, when the moral reality is that we are the ones who need to be honoring the treaties and paying reparations, their actions are actually like, no, you can have it, but you need to pay us for it. Like, it is completely back.
Yeah.
It's like their brains work back to front somehow.
Yeah. And I mean, I just want to say again, this is this year.
Yeah.
So going in and actually removing lands from a reservation is, I think, and you never know, no longer possible, right? The outcry would be so great. So I think the new technique is to chip away at these rights, chip away at their ability to govern, to have land sovereignty. The order would basically, for all intents and purposes, would take away their ability to operate as a sovereign nation on this land. This land has been their home for 12,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Their reservation occupies 321 acres that were originally occupied by their tribe. And that's actually pretty unique, right? They were not displaced, though I will say their lands were greatly reduced early on. So currently the tribe hunts deer, fishes, and forages for herbs, berries, and flowers on their land. They have an oyster farm, and they're building greenhouses to extend the season. And this is in the northeast, so they have a pretty harsh winter climate. They're growing squash, beans, corn, and medicinal herbs to treat illness. And they've had to fight to protect their waters from development as well, of course. So this is just another aggression on the part of our government against Native peoples in this country. Just another drop in the screwed up bucket that is our history. Now, the tribe filed for an emergency restraining order to stop the Department of the Interior, and the U.S. government hadn't tried to deestablish a reservation since the 1960s. So this sent shockwaves through Native communities. I didn't hear anything about it at the time. That's perhaps my own fault. But this was seen as indicative of the Trump administration's attitude towards Native people. So it created a lot of fear, needless to say.
Going back to the 60s really quickly, there's a lot of history around the American Indian movement, AIM, that's totally worth reading. They were very, very active in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. They occupied Alcatraz for 2 years. I recommend everyone read about it. It's amazing.
The U.S. District Court reversed the order from the Department of the Interior in June of this year. But in August, the Department of the Interior appealed this ruling. So I think this is a story that's still unfolding. Now, the tribe still, amazingly, isn't fully established from a federal perspective. Right now, there's this big push from progressives to convince Biden to install a Native American appointee to the Department of the Interior.
Correct.
Which also oversees the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which I was kind of amazed that it's still called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But so this position, this cabinet position, controls 500 million acres and addresses the care of the Native people who live in this country, who have survived. There are two viable candidates. There's Deb Haaland, who's a New Mexico representative.
Yes, she's amazing.
She's Laguna Pueblo, and she's one of the first two Native American women elected to Congress. So she and another woman were elected in 2018. We've never had a Native American cabinet secretary in this country. She doesn't have a whole lot of experience in policy. I think you could debate that point, but she does have a lot of momentum behind her, and she has a lot of the public attention right now.
So that's something that we can do, is whatever your representatives are, whatever letters you need to write, whatever calls you need to make, that is something that we can advocate for, because cabinet appointments they're political and they require, approval, but, pressure from the constituency works.
I agree. The other viable candidate is Michael L. Connor, who's Taos Pueblo. And he was actually the deputy Interior Secretary for Obama. So no one can argue that he doesn't have the experience. He has ample experience, but he's not as well known of a public figure as Deb is. So two really great candidates, two possibilities. Elizabeth Cronk Warner, who's a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and professor and dean of law at the University of Utah, says, quote, "The Department of the Interior was the driving force of modern-day genocide against the Native American peoples.
Yep.
We would be moving from the shadows of perpetuated genocide to a chair at the table, from being classified as a group of people that the federal government was trying to destroy, to having a president say, 'I see you and value you to the point that I will raise you to the highest level of decision-making in the country.'" End quote. So the Biden administration says they haven't decided on the appointment for the Department of the Interior. But Biden's campaign has a plan that aims to improve justice for Native Americans. And his campaign says, quote, "Biden will ensure tribes have a seat at the table at the highest levels of federal government," end quote. I would consider this a seat at the table at the highest levels of government. So let's all push for that.
Yep.
I'm going to be watching this carefully. It feels like it would bring things full circle on a small, tiny scale.
Yeah.
It would be a good start to put a Native American in charge of relationships and care for Native peoples in this country and in charge of the land of this country.
Yep.
The Department of the Interior like I said, it oversees 500 acres. That is
500 million acres, right?
500 million, excuse me. Yes, thank you. 500 million acres. That is national parks. That is gas and oil drilling, right? All of these things that are up for us. So let's watch that.
Yes. Unless you want to see the Grand Canyon fracked, we need to have a different perspective on these things.
Yep. I also think that part of acknowledging our history this Thanksgiving and looking at that is to know whose land you're living on. I'm so glad you brought that up. And to that end, there's this really cool website called nativeland.ca. And it's a digital map where you can put in your address and it shows you which tribe's land you're living on currently. And it's really, they have these various colors that represent the different tribes. And so it's actually really cool to see how much they overlap. And it's a different kind of map, right? There's not these straight lines and borders. I wanted to highlight a few champions of Indigenous culture, and I wanted to highlight a few organizations that people might be interested in donating to this Thanksgiving, because I think that's the next step, is to put your financial prowess behind causes and values that you have. So the first person I want to talk about is Sean Sherman. Now, he's the founder and CEO of the Sioux Chef, and it's Sioux, SIOUX.
It's awesome.
The Sioux Chef, and he's the author of The Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen, which is a James Beard award-winning cookbook that everybody should pick up. He is Ogallala Lakota. He's got a website called SiouxChef.com. It's, again, SIOUX-chef.com. He started the North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. It's an organization. It's NATIFs for short. Their website is natifs.org. And their mission is to address health and economic challenges to Native culture by reestablishing Native foodways. So this is obviously the holiday of Thanksgiving. We're thinking about food. They have a step-by-step guide on their website that includes, I'm just glossing over this very quickly. The first step is the removal of colonized thought. The second step is to reconnect spiritually, mentally, physically with the natural world. The third step is understand and build Indigenous foundations. The fourth step is regain, retain, share, and practice knowledge. So they're basically rediscovering, developing, and sharing Indigenous approaches to food. Again, it's natifs.org. They are a nonprofit. You can donate to them. On SiouxChef.com, Sean says, "We are committed to revitalizing Native American cuisine, and in the process, we are re-identifying North American cuisine and reclaiming an important culinary culture long buried and often inaccessible." And they have a great resource on their website, which is a list of Indigenous food producers across the country. So, in my ideal world, we should be eating natively produced foods in this country, especially on a holiday like Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I will also fully say I am not doing that. So there's room for me certainly to improve.
Yeah. But like, if we think about issues of climate change, like modern food production has so much to do with climate change, the amount of meat we consume and the way it's raised and all of those things. And if we're talking about being interconnected and about embodying and living interconnectedness with our place, we have examples to follow. It's not like no one has done this, right? Like, we can follow the example of all of the peoples we attempted to kill because they were doing it for 12,000 years.
A couple of other organizations people might be interested in knowing about. There's the Native American Heritage Association, which appealed to me particularly because they operate in South Dakota and Wyoming. They're addressing food insecurity, and they donate food, clothing, and heating assistance to the Sioux tribes in Wyoming and South Dakota. Those are the Crow Creek, Lower Brule, Pine Ridge, Cheyenne River, and Rosebud reservations. Their website is naha-inc.org. naha-inc.org. There's also the First Nations Development Institute. Their website is firstnations.org. They provide grants, technical assistance, training, advocacy, and policy toward the goal of improving Native Americans' economic conditions. They have this really cool program called Reclaiming Native Truth, and the goal of this program is to adjust the narrative around Indigenous people in this country, which I think is so essential. We have to change the story. We have to change the way we talk about things, and I think if we change the way we talk about things, it's going to change the way we think about things. So I think that's incredibly important work.
We learn new words so that we can have new thoughts.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So I should also just mention a lot of what I just said about those organizations are direct quotes from their website, but there's additional information. So I encourage everybody to get out there and check out organizations they might want to support this holiday season.
That's great. That's really
Spend a little bit less on, I don't know, hair products.
I work at a grocery store, and somebody came through last night and had like standard white American Thanksgiving stuff, and also literally 10 sticks of deodorant. And I had nothing but questions about what the hell was going on with that. Like, are you concerned that you're going to get the meat sweats so bad that you're going to need all of this in a single day? I wanted to ask, but it's very hectic pace, and I didn't have the opportunity.
Well, if you roll on some deodorant to your turkey, it holds in the moisture during cooking. Keeps it really tender. That was a joke, everyone. Please don't do that.
I don't know. Is it a joke if you have to say that was a joke? Oh, burn.
Joe.
Burn. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. It's an ongoing learning process. We're definitely not there. Probably we'll never get there. There's probably no there. But yeah, very important. And because we aren't sitting down with racist cousin Paul, for example, at Thanksgiving this year, maybe it is a chance, like I said, break it apart so that it can come back together in a reorganized way. And one of those ways being acknowledgement of whose land you're actually walking on right now.
Yeah. And I think definitely be grateful. Definitely prepare food and enjoy it with your loved ones. Hopefully the loved ones that live in your house. Stay home, protect each other, take care of each other, and spend a little bit of time getting in touch with perhaps some sorrowful feelings.
Yeah.
About what it's cost for us to be here this year.
Yeah. And also, like you just said, giving thanks is important. Gratitude is important. But let's not be grateful for a lie or a myth.
Yeah.
Let's be grateful for what we're doing right now to undo centuries of horrible things that people like us and some of our direct ancestors have perpetrated. Yeah.
And it's really hard, but I am grateful to know all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the truth is always better. It's always better.
It's hard,
Yeah.
but better.
Yeah. So have we effectively ruined Thanksgiving for everybody?
Please let us know. Email us at itchoosesyou.podcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. Let us know how your Zoom Thanksgiving goes.
I should also say I will be sitting down to a meal.
Yeah.
So I'm not absenting myself from the process. I'm just trying to sit with the complexity of it, which is really difficult for me.
Yeah.
When we first started discussing the idea of doing this episode, I said to you, it's usually all or nothing for me.
Yeah.
You know, but I am trying to grow and sit in my ability to be able to hold two contrary thoughts.
Are you Keatsian? Are you practicing your negative capability? Is that what's
Yes.
happening right now?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it was lovely to talk to you as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all that wonderful research you did, and
Thank you for quoting all of that wonderful research other people did, I think is what you meant.
Thank you for telling me the truth, Teresa.
Yeah, I try always.
Have a wonderful week.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Testing? Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyouPodcast@gmail.com.